The saloon in Dust Devil Springs was a festering wound on the face of the frontier, a place where hope came to die. The air, thick with the stench of cheap whiskey, sweat, and despair, clung to everything. It was into this bleakness that Jacob entered, his shoulders slumped with a weariness that went far beyond the dust of the trail. He was a man who lived in the long shadow of ghosts, a lonely rancher whose sprawling lands felt as empty as his heart. A blizzard years ago had stolen his wife and child, leaving him with a lifetime of guilt and a self-imposed exile from the world of men. He came to town only when he had to, for salt, for flour, for the things that would keep his body alive while his soul slowly starved. But today, the usual cacophony of drunken laughter and tinny piano music was pierced by a sound far uglier. A hulking, greasy-haired trapper named Rob stood by the bar, his voice a booming instrument of cruelty. He was holding the arm of a young woman, his fingers digging into her flesh like talons. She was thin, dressed in rags, but it was the scar that drew every eye. A jagged, silver line that ran from her temple to her jaw, a brutal map of past violence. "A cask of your finest French wine," Rob roared at the bartender, shoving the woman forward. "That's the price for this damaged mare," the crowd laughed, a ragged, cruel sound. Men pointed, their faces twisted with a mixture of scorn and pathetic desire. They mocked her scars, turning her pain into their sordid entertainment. The woman, whose name no one bothered to ask, stood silent, her gaze fixed on the floorboards, her body a statue of shame. But Jacob saw the tremor in her hands, the flicker of defiance in an eye that wasn't clouded by the scar. In her public humiliation, he saw a horrifying echo of his own failure, of the family he couldn't protect. A forgotten corner of his heart, long dormant and covered in the ash of grief, began to ache with a dangerous, unfamiliar heat. He had come for supplies, but he had stumbled into a reckoning. Rob, the trapper, was a man who personified the brutal indifference of the wilderness. He was a predator, and he saw everything and everyone in terms of what he could take, what he could use, and what he could break. He reveled in the fear he inspired, his power measured by the silence that fell when he entered a room. He held the woman's arm, parading her like a hunting trophy. "She's quiet, and she works hard," he boasted to the leering crowd, his words a salesman's pitch for a piece of livestock. "Got a temper, but a man's hand can fix that." He gave her a rough shake to emphasize his point, and she stumbled, catching herself with a resilience that seemed to infuriate him. Jacob watched, his own hands clenching into fists at his sides. He tried to turn away, to retreat back into the comfortable numbness of his grief. He told himself it was not his fight. He had learned the hard way that the world was a brutal place and he was powerless to change it. But the image of his wife, her face pale in the swirling snow of his memory, refused to fade. He had been too late then. The thought was a spur in his side. Before his conscious mind could stop him, he found himself stepping forward, his worn boots silent on the dusty floor. His voice, rusty from disuse, was quiet but carried through the saloon. "I'll give you $50 for her." A hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to the reclusive rancher. Rob spun around, his face a mask of disbelief that quickly curdled into a sneer. $50? For what? The pleasure of looking at that ruined face. The crowd roared with laughter. Jacob's face remained a stony mask. Let her go. Rob's eyes narrowed, intrigued by this strange new game. He enjoyed breaking things, and the quiet dignity of the lonely rancher was something he suddenly felt a powerful urge to shatter. "She's worth more than your paltry 50, rancher. She's worth a cask of the finest wine, a taste of civilization." Jacob stood his ground. He reached behind him and unslung the rifle from his back. It was a fine weapon, his one true luxury, a symbol of his self-reliance and the tool that kept him alive. This rifle. For the woman the offer hung in the air, stunning the crowd into silence. The rifle was worth 5 times what Rob was asking. Rob looked from the rifle to Jacob's impassive face, a slow, cruel smile spreading across his own. To take this man's gun, to strip him of his pride in public, was a prize far sweeter than wine. "Done," he grunted, shoving the woman toward Jacob and snatching the rifle from his hands. Jacob led the woman out of the saloon's suffocating darkness and into the harsh, cleansing light of the sun. She followed a step behind him, a phantom of a person, her silence a heavy cloak. He expected tears, or perhaps a cowering fear, but she was a well of stillness, her expression unreadable. He walked her toward his wagon at the edge of town, the stares of the townsfolk like insects on his skin. He stopped and turned to her, his voice softer than he intended. "My name is Jacob." "You're safe now." For the first time, she lifted her head, and her eyes met his. They were the color of a forest after rain, and they held a depth of intelligence and sorrow that startled him. Her voice, when she spoke, was not the broken rasp he expected, but a clear, educated whisper that carried the ghost of a different life. "My name is Elizabeth." The name was like a piece of music in the dusty air. Then the twist came, a revelation that changed everything. She whispered, her gaze flickering back toward the saloon. "That man, Rob. He was not my master. He was one of the bandits." The story spilled out in a quiet torrent. She and her father, a wealthy academic from Boston, had been traveling west. Their wagon train was attacked by a band of ruthless men. Her father was killed. Her scar was a gift from the blade of one of the men who had held her down. Rob had been one of them. He hadn't just found her, he had helped destroy her world. And he held something he had stolen from her father's body, a sealed letter, which he, in his brutish ignorance, believed was a map to a hidden fortune. "He thinks it leads to gold," she murmured, a flicker of bitter irony in her eyes. "He cannot read. He does not know what it truly is." The stakes had just skyrocketed. This was no longer a simple rescue of a victim. Jacob had just purchased a witness to a murder, and now he was standing in the crosshairs of a killer who believed she was the key to untold riches. His simple act of conscience had just ignited a fire that threatened to consume them both. The weight of Elizabeth's story settled on Jacob like a shroud. He had wanted to soothe a small corner of his conscience, and had instead walked into a war. He looked at her, at the proud, straight line of her back, and saw not a victim, but a survivor. His own lonely ranch, once a sanctuary, now seemed like a trap. Rob, drunk on his newly acquired wine and his own cruelty, would not let this go. The thought of a hidden fortune, however imaginary, would gnaw at him. Jacob knew men like Rob, their greed was a ravenous, insatiable beast. As if summoned by his thoughts, the doors of the saloon burst open and Rob staggered out, flanked by two of his brutish companions. His face was flushed with wine and rage. "Rancher," he bellowed, his voice slurring but filled with menace. "The deal has changed. I want the girl back. And I want the map she's hiding." Elizabeth flinched, but Jacob stepped in front of her, a silent shield. "The deal is done, Rob. You have my rifle. Now leave us be." Rob laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "Your rifle? I'll have your rifle, your ranch, and your life if you don't give me what is mine." He took a swaggering step forward, his eyes wild. "I know who she is. I know what her father was carrying. Give me the map, or I will burn that pathetic little ranch of yours to the ground with both of you inside it." The threat, so specific and vile, struck Jacob like a physical blow. Fire. The one thing that haunted his nightmares. The blizzard had taken his family, but in his dreams, it was always a fire he couldn't reach, a fire he couldn't stop. He could feel the phantom heat on his face, hear the ghostly screams. Everything inside him screamed to run, to give Rob whatever he wanted, to retreat back to the safety of his isolation and his ghosts. He was at a crossroads, a moment of terrible clarity. Behind him lay the quiet, painful peace of his solitude. Before him stood a killer, and a woman who had already lost everything. His past failure and his present choice collided. What would you do? When a monster threatens to recreate your worst nightmare, do you save yourself, or do you stand and fight for a stranger who has no one else? Tell me in the comments below what you would have chosen. And if you believe that a man's true character is forged in the fires of his greatest fear, make sure you subscribe, because what Jacob does next defines his soul. Jacob did not run. He looked at Rob, at the raw, undisguised evil in the man's eyes, and felt not fear, but a cold, clarifying rage. The ghosts of his past were no longer whispering accusations, they were demanding justice. He thought of his wife and child, and for the first time in years, the memory gave him strength instead of pain. He would not be too late again. "There is no map," Jacob said, his voice as hard and unyielding as granite. "And you will not touch her," Rob, enraged by his defiance, roared and lunged forward. But before he could reach them, a new voice cut through the tension, sharp and authoritative. "Rob." "That's enough." The voice belonged to Doc Evans, the town's physician, a man whose weary eyes had seen too much of the violence and misery that men like Rob brought into the world. He stepped out from his office, holding a double-barreled shotgun, its twin muzzles pointed squarely at the trapper's chest. "I've tolerated your filth in this town for far too long." The crowd, which had been watching from a safe distance, murmured in surprise. Doc Evans was not a man known for confrontation. Rob sneered, "Stay out of this, old man. This is between me and the rancher." But the doctor stood his ground, his hand steady on the shotgun. "It became my business months ago, when I treated a dying man you claim to have found on the trail. A man from Boston. He told me his daughter had been taken by the bandits who attacked him. He died before he could tell me more." The doctor's gaze flickered to Elizabeth, and a look of dawning comprehension crossed his face. "You lied, Rob. You were one of them." This public accusation, from a respected figure like the doctor, was a lightning bolt. It electrified the air. Inspired by his courage, the saloon owner appeared in the doorway, a pistol in his hand. "Rob, your credit is cut off. Get out of my town." A few other townsmen, ranchers, and merchants who had suffered under Rob's bullying began to step forward, their faces grim. An alliance was forming, a fragile wall of decency against a tide of brutality, all of it sparked by one lonely rancher's refusal to back down. The standoff in the dusty street was a silent, explosive tableau. Rob and his two thugs were outnumbered, but they were cornered, and that made them dangerous. Rob looked at the faces arrayed against him, the doctor, the saloon owner, the blacksmith now holding a heavy hammer, and his rage boiled over. With a guttural roar, he drew his pistol. "You'll all burn," he screamed, but his threat was cut short. The gunfight was not the prolonged, chaotic affair of dime novels. It was a swift, brutal, and decisive moment of frontier justice. Jacob, moving with an instinct born of years spent hunting predators in the wild, had already drawn the small pistol he kept tucked in his belt. He fired once. The shot was not aimed to kill, but to end the fight. His bullet struck Rob's wrist, and the trapper's gun clattered uselessly into the dust. At the same time, the blacksmith swung his hammer in a low, powerful arc, catching one of the other thugs in the knee, while the saloon owner's shot went wide but was enough to make the third man drop his weapon and raise his hands in surrender. It was over in less than 5 seconds. The sudden, shocking violence was followed by an equally shocking silence. Rob cradled his shattered wrist, howling in a mixture of pain and impotent fury. His reign of terror, built on fear and intimidation, had been dismantled in an instant. The town's sheriff, a man who had made a career of looking the other way, finally scurried out of his office, his face pale. Seeing the tide had turned, he was suddenly full of blustering authority, arresting the groaning Rob and his men. In the aftermath, Doc Evans gently retrieved the letter from Rob's coat. He handed it to Elizabeth. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. There was no map, no talk of gold. It was a father's last words to his beloved daughter, a heart-wrenching letter filled with love, pride, and his hopes for her future. Tucked inside was the deed to a small, promising property in the green valleys of California. This letter, this testament of love, was the treasure Rob had been willing to kill for. Months passed, and the seasons turned, washing the land clean. On the outskirts of Dust Devil Springs, Jacob's ranch, once a monument to his solitude and sorrow, was slowly being reborn. It was no longer a place of mere survival, but a place of life. The oppressive silence had been replaced by the sounds of construction, the lowing of healthy cattle, and something Jacob thought he would never hear again in his own home, the soft, melodic sound of a woman humming as she worked. Elizabeth was the source of this transformation. She was not a guest or a dependent, she was a partner. She had a keen mind for numbers and a gentle hand with the animals. She planted a garden, and under her care, vibrant greens and bright flowers erupted from the same soil where Jacob had only ever managed to grow dust and grief. The scar on her face was still there, a permanent reminder of the life that was stolen from her. But her eyes, once haunted, were now clear and bright, filled with a quiet strength. Jacob found himself changing, too. The hard, bitter shell he had built around his heart began to crack. He started to talk about his wife and child, not with the gut-wrenching guilt of before, but with a gentle sadness, sharing their memory with Elizabeth. He taught her how to ride, how to mend a fence, how to read the clouds for signs of rain. And in teaching her, he began to reconnect with the world, and with himself. He started to smile again, a slow, rusty process at first, but soon it became a natural expression. He was no longer just a man haunted by ghosts, he was a man building a future. They were two broken people, scarred by the world in different ways, who had found a way to start piecing themselves, and each other, back together. Their relationship was not a whirlwind romance born of passion and fire. It was a slow, quiet healing, as patient and steady as the changing seasons. It was built in the shared silence of a sunset, in the simple comfort of a meal cooked together, in the unspoken understanding that passed between them as they worked side by side. Jacob, who had once fled from all human connection, now found himself seeking her company, craving the peaceful presence that soothed the ragged edges of his soul. He had lived for years believing he was being punished for his failure, that he deserved his loneliness. But in Elizabeth's eyes, he saw not judgment, but gratitude. He saw a reflection of a man he had forgotten he could be, a protector, a provider, a good man. For Elizabeth, the ranch was more than a safe harbor, it was a place to put down new roots after her entire world had been ripped away. She had arrived as chattel, a piece of property traded for a rifle. But Jacob had never treated her as anything less than an equal. He had given her not only safety, but respect. He listened to her ideas, valued her contributions, and saw past her scar to the brilliant, resilient woman she was. Their scars, his emotional and hers physical, were not things to be hidden in shame. They were testaments to their survival, the proof that they had weathered the worst storms life could throw at them and had come out on the other side. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars blanket the vast, quiet sky, Jacob turned to her and simply said, it wasn't a command or a question, but a plea. And Elizabeth, with a soft smile, simply replied, always. 1 year to the day after Jacob had walked into that saloon, he and Elizabeth stood on the porch of their newly expanded ranch house, looking out at the land that was now theirs together. They were married, a quiet ceremony attended only by Doc Evans and a few of their other friends from town. The ranch was thriving, a testament to their hard work and partnership. Elizabeth held a new letter in her hand, this one from a lawyer in California. The land her father had left her was valuable, and she was now a woman of independent means. But she had chosen to stay here, in this dusty corner of the world, with the quiet rancher who had seen her worth when no one else had. Jacob looked at his wife, at the scar that he no longer saw as a mark of damage but as a symbol of her incredible strength, and his heart was full. The moral of their story was written across the landscape of their lives, a lesson as clear as the prairie sky. It teaches us that the deepest scars, both visible and invisible, do not have to define us. They can be reminders of what we have survived, proof of our resilience. Their story shows that true beauty is not found in a flawless face, but in a courageous spirit, and that true redemption is found not in hiding from the world and its pain, but in having the courage to open your heart to it one more time, even when you are terrified. It is a story about how two lonely, broken souls can create a home, not by erasing their pasts, but by building a future on the foundation of their shared survival. Jacob and Elizabeth found their second chance because he chose courage over comfort, and she chose to trust when she had every reason not to. Their story is a powerful testament to the strength of the human spirit to heal and to love again. If you were inspired by their journey from desperation to redemption, then subscribe to our channel and become part of a community that celebrates these tales of courage and compassion. Your subscription is a signal that these are the stories that matter, the ones that remind us of the best we can be. And your journey with us does not have to end here. A new story, an even more powerful one, is waiting for you right now. What happens when an old, Mute Prospector, a man the world has forgotten, is the only one who knows the location of a stolen child, and the only person who can bring her back is the cynical, disgraced sheriff who exiled him years ago. To find out if they can overcome their bitter past to save an innocent life, click on the video that you see on your screen right now. Don't wait. The next adventure into the heart of what it means to be a hero is ready to begin. Click now, and we will see you there.